Have you ever watched someone lose everything, love, dignity, hope, even their mind, and then seen life do something so unexpected that it leaves an entire community speechless? Because in one small African village, where news moved faster than harmattan wind and secrets rarely stayed hidden beyond sunset, a woman returned carrying shame in her heart and courage in her footsteps, only to meet the man she once abandoned talking to the dust like someone who no longer belonged to himself. And what happened after that became the kind of story elders repeated under moonlight, the kind mothers used to teach daughters that life does not always reward quick decisions, and the kind fathers remembered whenever they spoke about patience, mercy, and second chances. Before this story unfolds completely, if you love powerful, inspirational stories drawn from real human emotions, this is a good moment to subscribe and stay with this channel, because stories like this remind us that no life is ever too broken for restoration. The village was called Yumuod, a quiet place where mornings began with roosters, firewood smoke, and women sweeping compounds before sunrise. In that village, almost everyone knew Chinedu long before trouble found him. He was the kind of young man people pointed at when advising their children. The first son of a widowed mother. The first graduate in his family. The first person from his compound who returned from university carrying books, certificates, and hope large enough for an entire household. His late father had been a farmer who died before seeing the future his son eventually built, but his mother never stopped speaking proudly of him. When neighbors gathered, she always found a way to mention his discipline. If a child failed an exam, she would say, "Ask Chinedu how he studied under lantern light." If young men wandered carelessly, she would say, "Look at Chinedu. Greatness does not shout. It grows quietly." And truly, Chinedu carried himself with uncommon calm. He repaired radios for old men without collecting payment. He wrote letters for market women whose children lived in cities. He taught younger students after school beneath the mango tree near the village square. Even when he later found work in town, he returned every weekend to check on his mother and help where he could. He was not wealthy. He was not flashy. But there was something stronger than money in him, a steadiness that made people trust his future. Then Adaobi entered that future. She first came to Yumuod during one long holiday season to stay with her aunt. The first thing many people noticed was that she greeted elders properly. The second was that she spoke gently. The third was that Chinedu began passing near her aunt's compound more often than necessary. Their first conversation happened at the borehole one afternoon when she struggled with a heavy bucket. He offered help. She refused politely. Then the bucket slipped. Water splashed over both of them, and laughter erased formal distance before names even mattered. After that day, greetings became longer. Longer greetings became conversations. Conversations became evening walks after sunset when village noise softened and the sky turned orange. People noticed quickly. Villages always notice quickly. Within months, they had become what everyone expected. The pair likely heading toward marriage. Their love was not noisy. No dramatic display. No reckless promises. It was built through patience. Phone calls when she returned to the city. Letters before smartphones became common. Visits whenever possible. Shared prayers. Shared plans. Chinedu saved carefully from his modest salary. He denied himself comfort because he believed beginnings should be prepared with dignity. He once told a friend, "A home does not begin with wealth. It begins with trust." And he trusted Adaobi completely. When his job contract ended unexpectedly, she still encouraged him. When he returned to the village temporarily, she told him difficult seasons did not last forever. That was why no one understood the silence that slowly replaced her warmth later. At first her calls became shorter, then irregular, then difficult. Her explanations sounded tired. Work pressure, family demands, busy schedule. But love often hears fear hidden inside ordinary excuses. One evening, after many failed attempts, she finally answered his call. Her voice trembled before words came. And in that trembling, Chinedu already understood something had changed. She explained that another man had come into her life. A businessman, established, financially secure, approved by her family, someone her relatives believed offered certainty. She said she had struggled with the decision. She said life was complicated. She said feelings alone did not feed the future. Then she cried and asked him to understand. He listened without shouting, without insult, without begging. After the call ended, he sat in darkness until morning. Days later, a wedding invitation reached the village through another person. Not from her directly. A printed card carrying her name beside another man's name. He took the invitation, folded it carefully, and placed it inside his Bible. Nobody understood why he kept it. But some heartbreaks are too deep even for anger. He tried to continue. And outwardly he did. He found another opportunity teaching in a secondary school near the village. His students loved his calm explanations. He taught literature like someone opening hidden doors. He paid exam fees for children whose parents could not afford them. He encouraged boys drifting toward hopelessness. To everyone watching, life appeared to move again. But grief has seasons people cannot see. And some wounds do not heal simply because time has passed. His mother remained his strongest emotional shelter. She noticed the silence, but never forced him to speak. Instead, she prayed for him quietly and urged him toward new possibilities. Whenever women suggested marriage prospects, he smiled politely and refused. Sometimes he said he was not ready. Sometimes he changed the subject. Then sickness entered his home. His mother became weak. At first she dismissed it. Then came hospital visits. Then medicines. Then expenses larger than his salary. He sold his motorcycle, borrowed money, worked extra lessons, reduced his own food. But her body kept failing. One rainy morning before dawn, she died. And something inside Chinidu that had survived heartbreak finally broke. The burial gathered the whole village. People stood with him, prayed, comforted him, promised support. But grief is loudest after visitors leave. The compound became painfully quiet. He lived alone, cooked rarely, spoke less, walked slower. Still he tried teaching. Still he forced normalcy. Then salary delays began at school. Months passed without pay. Relatives started arguing over family land. Debt increased. Sleep disappeared. Pressure gathered from every side until one morning he failed to appear in class. A student sent to check found him seated behind his house, staring into dry grass, whispering to nobody visible. By afternoon he laughed alone. By evening he stood barefoot in the road talking to the wind. Children ran. Women watched from doorways. Men gathered under the mango tree. And before night ended, everyone knew. The respected young teacher had lost his mind. At first people explained it spiritually. Some blamed enemies. Some blamed heartbreak returning after years. Others said too much thinking destroys a man faster than hunger. Relatives rushed him to prayer houses. Then herbalists. Then fasting centers. He resisted food. Shouted at night. Sang church hymns loudly after midnight. Sometimes cried like a child. Sometimes laughed at invisible people. Then suddenly, one evening, he began repeating one name again and again. Adayabi. 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 A traveler from the village later carried the story to Lagos, where someone mentioned hearing that Adayabi's marriage had not become the paradise people once imagined. Her husband had died in a road accident years after a bitter union marked by loneliness, cruelty, and disappointment. Whether she was happy or broken, nobody knew clearly. But the message reached her. And one morning, without announcement, she boarded a bus back to Umuod. Dust followed the bus as it stopped at the village entrance. She stepped down carrying one bag, and a face shaped by years no longer soft with youthful certainty. Women noticed first. Then children. Then old men seated beneath shade. Whispers rose immediately. Adayabi. Now. After all these years? She greeted elders and walked straight toward Chinida's compound. The gate hung open. He sat on bare ground drawing lines in dust with a stick, hair rough, beard uneven, shirt hanging carelessly. He looked up when her shadow reached him. For several seconds he stared, then tilted his head and asked softly, "Did they also send you from the sky?" Her throat tightened. She knelt before him. "It is me," she said. He studied her face like someone searching through broken memory, then whispered, "Ada," and laughed strangely before looking away. That afternoon she stayed. Not for minutes. Not for courtesy. She cleaned his room, opened windows, washed plates piled in corners, prepared food. When he refused to eat, she fed him slowly. By evening the village knew she had not left. His uncle confronted her. "What exactly are you doing here?" Her answer surprised him. "I came because he once loved me when I did not deserve it." That night she slept near the doorway because he woke screaming twice. At dawn he tried running toward the road, claiming someone called him from the river. She held him until neighbors helped. Days became weeks. People expected her to leave. She remained. If this story is touching you already, subscribe now, because what happens next reveals that healing often begins where pride ends. And many more stories like this are waiting for you here. Adeobi insisted he needed proper treatment. Some relatives resisted. They preferred prayer alone. But she took him to a hospital in town. The doctor explained what many feared hearing: severe psychological breakdown caused by trauma, prolonged grief, malnutrition, emotional collapse, and untreated stress. He needed medication, routine, patience, protection, and patience became her daily labor. She sold jewelry, used savings, later sold the last valuable item left from her failed marriage. Morning after morning, she gave him medicine. Afternoon after afternoon, she stopped him from wandering. Night after night, she endured insults from a mind still unstable. Some days he accused her of stealing voices. Some days he called her by names from years past. Some days he forgot who she was entirely. But healing rarely arrives dramatically. It enters quietly through repetition. One evening he watched her peel yam and asked, "Why do your eyes look familiar?" Another day he whispered, "You left before rain that year." Fragments returned, slowly, like light entering a room through cracks. Months passed. The laughter at invisible people reduced. His speech steadied. He gained weight. He bathed without persuasion. He sat with elders again beneath the mango tree. Children no longer feared passing near his compound. Then one Sunday he entered church for the first time in months. The congregation turned. He walked carefully to a back bench. During prayer, he cried openly. Not loudly, just deeply. Even the pastor paused before continuing, because some tears preach better than words. As memory returned fully, shame followed. He avoided mirrors, avoided crowds, avoided long conversations. One evening he asked Adeobi, "Did I disgrace myself badly?" She answered honestly, "You suffered badly." Then came the question he had carried silently. "Why did you stay?" She took time before answering. Because truth spoken too quickly can sound careless. Finally she said, "I learned too late that a comfortable life can still be empty. But abandoning a sincere heart leaves a poverty money cannot heal." He said nothing that night, but silence changed between them. It was no longer the silence of strangers. It became the silence of people standing near truth. Weeks later he returned partially to teaching. Students stood when he entered class with unusual respect. He spoke slowly at first, then stronger. One day he told them, "A tree struck by lightning can still bear fruit if roots remain alive." The class wrote it down, though it was not part of the lesson. Adeobi remained in the village and started small trading. Vegetables, basic provisions, nothing large, just enough to remain useful without dependence. People talked less now, because what began as gossip had become visible sacrifice. One evening he found the old Bible and removed the faded wedding invitation he had once kept. He carried it outside where she sorted peppers, placed it before her. "I kept this." She looked at it and lowered her eyes. "I know I hurt you." "You did," he answered calmly. Then she asked softly, "Can someone return after destroying what was given to them?" He replied, "That depends on why they returned." She lifted her face. I came because guilt would not leave me. But I stayed because every day I saw the same goodness I once abandoned. For days afterward, neither spoke further. But understanding deepened. Not sudden romance. Not dramatic reconciliation. Something steadier. One market day an old woman laughed when she saw them buying tomatoes together. After all this trouble, will you people now finally use your sense? Even they laughed. Months later his uncle spoke privately to him. If peace has returned wearing a familiar face, do not chase it away because of old pain. He thought deeply. Forgiveness is one thing. Trust is another. Marriage after broken history is another mountain entirely. Still, he remembered who had stayed when dignity left him. One evening he invited Adaobi beneath the same Udala tree where they once spoke years earlier. The air smelled of evening dust and distant cooking fires. He said quietly, I cannot pretend the past never happened. I am not asking you to. I also cannot pretend what you have done means little. She listened without interrupting. Then he continued, when my mind was gone, you stood where stronger people disappeared. She whispered, I only did what I should have done long ago. He shook his head. No. You returned when staying offered no advantage. Then he asked directly, if we begin again, it must not be pity. It is not pity. Not guilt. It is no longer guilt. Then tell me plainly. She breathed deeply. I want peace. And every painful lesson I have lived taught me that peace left when I left you. The leaves moved overhead. Evening thickened. Then he smiled, a real smile, whole and quiet. People will talk. She smiled too. They never stopped. 3 months later drums filled Yumuod. Women danced. Canopies rose. Children ran carrying sachets of water. The same village that once watched him wander now gathered to witness his marriage. Chinidu stood dressed in clean traditional attire, steady and dignified. Adaobi stood beside him, radiant with a humility more beautiful than youthful pride. When the elder asked if he accepted her willingly, he answered clearly, I accept not because life was easy, but because mercy gave both of us another chance. When asked if she accepted him, tears filled her eyes. I accept with gratitude for what I once failed to value. Even old skeptics became quiet, because some moments silence every argument. Their marriage did not erase old wounds instantly. He still had nights of difficult memory. She still carried regret. But now pain had partnership, and partnership changes pain. Together they reopened part of his mother's compound into an evening lesson center for village children. He taught. She managed books and food. Children who could not pay still learned. Parents contributed what they could. A chalkboard stood where despair had nearly buried purpose. Every evening, children arrived carrying worn notebooks, dusty sandals, and dreams too fragile to survive neglect. Some came hungry. Some came after helping parents in farms. Some came because they had heard that teacher Chinidu explained lessons like someone lighting a lantern inside darkness. Adaobi welcomed each child like someone who understood what second chances meant. She kept water ready. Sometimes she cooked little portions of yam when a child looked too weak to focus. Sometimes she sat quietly listening while Chinidu explained literature, history, and life with equal patience. And slowly, that compound became more than a lesson center. It became a place where broken things learned usefulness again. A place where children saw a man once mocked by madness now shaping futures. A place where a woman once judged for her choices now serving quietly without defending herself. The village noticed. Villages always notice transformation. One elderly man who had once declared that Chinidu would never recover began sending his grandson there daily. A woman who once mocked Adaobi openly later brought vegetables as support. Even those who had doubted now lowered their voices whenever speaking about them. Because healing had become too visible to deny. Years passed. The lesson center grew. A local pastor donated benches. A trader contributed chalk. Former students returned during holidays to greet Chinidu and thank him. One young boy who nearly dropped out of school later passed his exams and entered university. The day he returned with admission papers, Chinidu held the paper for long seconds before smiling. That evening he sat outside after sunset longer than usual. Adaobi noticed and joined him quietly. The village air carried distant drums from another celebration somewhere far across the fields. He said softly, "There was a time I believed my life had already ended." She looked at him, but did not interrupt. He continued, "I remember pieces of those days now. Not clearly, but enough to know I had disappeared from myself." "You came back," she said gently. He nodded. "Because someone waited long enough." For a while they both listened to crickets. Then he asked the question he had never fully asked before. "When you first saw me that day, were you afraid?" She smiled faintly. "Yes." He turned slightly. "Then why did you stay?" This time her answer came faster than before. "Because fear is easier to carry than regret when regret has already followed you for years." He absorbed the words quietly. In the months that followed, they had their first child. A girl. The whole village celebrated because people love visible proof that sorrow did not win. His uncle slaughtered a goat. Women sang. Children danced outside the compound. When the naming ceremony came, many expected names connected to survival, grace, or restoration. And indeed, Chinita chose a name that made elders nod with approval. He called her Ifyananya, love, because after everything life had broken, he wanted his daughter to carry a reminder that love, when patient enough, can survive what pride destroys. Years later, when Ifyananya began asking questions children always ask, she once pointed at an old framed photo where her parents looked younger and asked, "Why are people dancing so much in this picture?" Adayabi laughed softly. Before she could answer, Chinita said, "Because people were celebrating what they thought they would never see." "What?" "That two people who almost lost everything were still standing." The child did not understand fully, but she smiled because his voice carried peace. And peace itself teaches children even before explanations do. As the years passed, Chinita became known beyond Yumuod. Nearby villages invited him to speak to young people. Not because he held titles. Not because he became wealthy. But because people trusted words spoken by someone whose life had gone through visible fire. He spoke often about pressure. About grief. About silence. About asking for help before darkness becomes too deep. He never hid what happened to him. He said openly, "A broken mind deserves treatment, not shame." Many listened because in many homes there were hidden battles nobody discussed. Adayabi rarely stood beside him during such talks. She preferred the background. But whenever people praised her openly, she always gave the same answer. "I only returned before it became too late." Yet inside her, she knew something deeper. She had not merely returned to him. She had returned to the version of herself she almost lost when she once chose security over sincerity. And perhaps that was why her service remained steady. Because redemption means more when it changes both giver and receiver. If this story has reached your heart, subscribe to the channel now for more inspirational African stories that carry real human lessons. Because sometimes one story arrives exactly when someone needs strength to keep going. Red Heart Television sparkles. One dry season evening, years later, Chinita stood again beneath the old mango tree where elders once discussed his downfall. The same place. The same village. But not the same man. Children ran nearby. Women returned from market. Goats crossed the road lazily. And an old elder seated there called him closer. "You know," the elder said, "when you first began talking to the wind, many of us thought life had finished with you." Chinita smiled calmly. "Sometimes life becomes quiet before it begins again." The elder laughed. "That one is true." Then after a pause he added, "And that woman of yours, she surprised this village." Chinita looked toward his compound where Adayabi stood calling their daughter inside. She surprised herself too. The elder nodded slowly, understanding more than words required. Because some stories stop being gossip and become wisdom. That night, after dinner, when darkness settled and lantern light glowed softly, Chinita opened the same old Bible where he had once kept her wedding invitation. The invitation was no longer there. Years earlier, on the evening before their own marriage, he had burned it quietly behind the house. Not out of anger, but because some memories should not remain stronger than healing. Instead, inside the Bible now rested a small photograph of their family. A simple picture. No luxury. No display. Just peace. He closed the Bible gently. Outside, distant drums sounded again from another celebration somewhere in the village. And as the sound floated through the night, he understood something he could never have understood in his worst days. Not every person who leaves returns. Not every person who returns is changed. Not every wound heals enough to trust again. But sometimes grace waits where judgment expected emptiness. Sometimes mercy survives longer than shame. And sometimes the very chapter people thought would bury a life becomes the testimony that gives others courage. Because in the end, what the village remembered was not merely that she came back. It was that she came back when there was nothing impressive left to gain.